a musician,
a long-distance kayaker,
a businessman,
she looks after animals,
artist,
author.
We interview remarkable people.
They're talented in so many different areas.
You're listening to The Dialogue.
89.7 FM Eastside Radio.
You're listening to The Dialogue on 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha. I'm your host for today, and we are talking to a remarkable man, Meiron Lees, who is a corporate advisor, author, and stress expert. Personally, I got him in here because he was a stress expert, and that sort of excited me. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
I've been really fortunate. You know, every now and again I get someone on my show who introduces me to some other incredible people, and normally you find that incredible people like other incredible people. So I was very, very lucky to kind of get your details and get you onto the show, and I found it so fascinating talking to you that we've started the interview so much later than we had intended to. Now, Meiron, you and I hail from essentially the same country, but you were actually born in Israel.
Yeah. I was born in Herzliya, about 45 minutes outside Tel Aviv.
Now, not very long there, and that's why you have the name Meiron. Meiron, do I say it right? Give us a bit of the...
Yeah, well, it's Meiron, and it's a difficult
Meiron.
name to pronounce. It's kind of, sometimes people think it's French, Meiron, and it sounds
That's what
kind of
I
quite
thought.
sexy. Yeah.
And then I heard your accent, and I was like, no, he's the same as me.
Yeah, similar accent. Apparently it means waters of happiness.
And how are you going with that, waters of happiness?
You know, I have my moments, but, generally pretty good.
So, ideally, born there and then taken to South Africa, 6 months, very Orthodox family structure.
Yes.
So that must have been kind of tricky growing up in an environment that was quite sort of Orthodox, where there were lots of rules and regulations. I mean, was that an easy thing for you?
I think growing up it was, because I didn't really know anything different, so it was fairly normalized. Orthodox Judaism was a way of life for me, and there's quite a good sense of community when you're growing up in that kind of environment, because you go to the synagogue and you have all the holidays, so you kind of feel quite safe, and you feel there's a great sense of community spirit, so you don't feel alone, everyone's doing the same thing. There's a sense of comfort in that.
But your parents were quite strict.
Yes.
You had quite strict parents.
I did.
And you know, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I think that was something that was quite difficult for you.
Yeah. Dad and Mom pretty much were brought up, all three of us. I'm the middle one, black sheep of the family. And yes, a very strict set of rules and values which we need to abide by. And of course, there were consequences if one didn't. I think the flip side of that is that I got brought up with a good value system, which I attribute to them. But yes, not easy to be brought up in an environment in which you feel you don't have much scope or flexibility in which to really express your own personality and the way of being.
Now, you have grown up to write a book. You're a stress expert. You're a corporate advisor. So you're very involved in the business world, and you were very successful in your business in South Africa in finance. And yet at school, you were a dummy. I mean, presumably a dummy. I mean, you went to a special school for children who had special learning needs. Well, you were sent off to classes for that.
Yes.
So, I mean, no one really believed in you. They never believed in your brilliant brain, which you clearly have.
Well, thank you. I'm not so sure about that. But yeah, I didn't get school. School didn't get me. In the middle of primary school, I got sent to these extra lessons, and I'm going, what am I doing here? And they gave me all these weird and wonderful things to do. I had no idea what the hell was going on. So it was interesting.
And a nerd. You know, nerdy. You found that, you know, it was hard to make friends. You didn't really, you just didn't fit in.
Yeah. That was pretty much me, you know, a little bit overweight, thick glasses, sitting in the corner, didn't say a word, no confidence, and hang around with the other nerds in the class. That was pretty much me.
Right. Well, life got a little bit more interesting when you got to the end of your school career. You decided to go off and do some sort of searching, especially around the religion and the spirituality. I mean, growing up in an Orthodox environment means that you have to accept what's going on. But I think you didn't necessarily want to. I mean, I called you a seeker. I think that was the word I used. Someone who seeks information, seeks that spirituality. What happened in that year in Israel when you went?
I went on a year religious program in which you studied, the Bible pretty much for 12 hours a day, and then interspersed that with a bit of kibbutz work. And my sense there was really to try and feel a depth in my spiritual practice, which failed to happen. So consequently, when I came back to South Africa after that year, I was feeling very confused in that this was supposed to be my religious spiritual path, and yet I wasn't connecting with it. And being the seeker that I am, I said, okay, well, best we go and find out where this is. So leaving that fold was quite challenging, having the Orthodox parents and only having Orthodox Jewish friends, leaving that and trying to find out, where does my spirituality exist? How do I tap into that?
I find that quite brave. I mean, I think it's brave leaving everything that you know behind. Living in a home and you've decided not to be Orthodox any longer, and choosing to leave your friends behind. I mean, that's hard. You may drink that water.
Yeah.
I will let you drink that water. We're not that strict in here. You may definitely take a sip. So you leave that behind, you go off to university, you scrape in to do a BCom, and you find some freedom.
Yeah.
But I think more than anything else, you must have been brought up with love, because that's a huge part of you.
Very much, very much. I mean, but my parents were very altruistic, always wanted to do kindness, and they're the most generous people on the planet. And I think that's kind of rubbed off on me, and I think it's reflective in the work that I do.
You're listening to 89.7 FM, Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue Show, where I interview remarkable people. Meiron Lees is my guest today, corporate advisor, author, and stress expert. You wrote a book when you came to Australia about stress, de-stress. I mean, have you experienced, is stress something you've experienced throughout your life? I mean, is stress something that you experience, or did you look at other people and think, well, I just want to, de-stress you? How did the stress thing happen?
It actually was born, funny enough, out of the fact that I recognized I had no idea how to handle my own stress.
Which is what most people do, Yeah. I need that, I'll go and do that for myself.
Yeah, so I was fascinated about how does one wake up in the morning and live with a content and peaceful existence, especially living with violent crime in South Africa, and recognizing I had no idea how to manage myself on a day-to-day basis in that environment. And that really sparked off my interest on how to manage one's mind in a challenging environment.
Now, growing up in South Africa, obviously, it was a fairly challenging environment anyway, especially after apartheid ended. And, there was a huge amount of violence. I think it touched everybody in some way or some form, especially in the beginning. That you found that quite difficult. You were very giving. You worked at Alexandria Hospital, which is in one of the townships. Yes. You were explaining that you were taking axes out of people's heads and sewing them up, and doing all of that. What was one of the most difficult experiences that you had while you were there?
I think it was the fact that there was so much violence and poverty going on literally within 5 kilometers from my home, and I was living this blessed life, and there were people that were suffering in an incredible violent environment, and that that discrepancy, that the fact that apartheid put them in this particular area, they had to live there in poverty, suffering, and then we kind of live in such a different environment, and I couldn't reconcile the two. So for me, it was around, how do I help? I've always been interested in the body and medicine and psychology, so I ended up doing some first aid course and
did you win an award or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was a little bit ridiculous. Some best first aider in South Africa or something similar, silly like that. But I wanted to do something with it, and I wanted to help. So I had a police escort, funnily enough, because I was the only token white guy doing the stuff. And going in there to Alex Clinic and helping people when they were affected. Severely affected by a lot of things. And yet,
for you, that was, some people would be traumatized by that. I think you were so sad when you eventually weren't allowed to do any longer, when it became too dangerous for you to go in. Yeah. It was a real sadness that you weren't able to go through that. Now, you got the big calm, you went and worked with your dad.
Yes.
So you're working with your father. You said he was very good at what he did, and you wanted to learn from him. What did you learn from him?
He was just such a people's person. Everybody loved him, and they could feel his good intentions, which he always had. Always used to teach us, do the right thing and do good for people. And I saw that growing up, and I always wanted him to mentor me one day in how to do that in business. And he was exceptionally successful financial advisor and had his own business. And I always admired him for what he did and worked hard, always to come home fairly late and used to tell us the stories about how he used to help people and pay out claims and all sorts of things. So that kind of inspired me to use the degree that I had, the commerce degree, in a meaningful way.
Now, you actually became very successful, very good at what you did. Why? What do you think you had that made you successful in that environment? It's a trust environment, first of all, and secondly of all, you have to be pretty switched on. So we weren't that bright at school. We scraped into the commerce degree, got our dad to mentor us, but then became extremely successful. For me, there's a big divide. Tell me, there has to be something inside you that creates that success trajectory.
Yeah, I think it's probably more an existential question for that I asked myself at the time. What is my purpose on earth? And for me, it's really about how do I touch people in a meaningful way? What impact can I make that will make a meaningful difference to others? And seeing my father do that in that environment really inspired me that, hey, I can do that. And when you're speaking to people on a personal level about their finances, and you want to make sure that they're protected in any situation that can affect them financially, that for me, it rang true. And the fact that I cared about people. For me, it was never about the commissions or the fees I was going to charge ever. Like half the time, I didn't even know what the commissions were. People used to ask me, I said, no idea. And that was the truth. It was just more, what can I do to be of service to you in the best possible way that I can? And that for me, getting to bed, and still it holds true today, getting to bed knowing that I've made a meaningful difference to others is exceptionally fulfilling.
So you landed up getting married. Fast and Furious. 3 years later, end of the story. Now, that doesn't interest me. What interests me is the fact that you are still single all these years later. And I reckon you look so incredibly eligible and seem so eligible.
You're way too kind.
So, no, not at all. So I'm curious about the fact that as a giver and as somebody who, that the idea of family and children haven't been part of that process for you. It interests me because that's, is that something that you want, something that you don't want?
Yeah, funny enough, when you're growing up and you're going to get married and you kind of visualize how your life will be, the picket fence, the dog called Rover, and some happy kids running around. And I kind of thought that would be my path. For various reasons, it hasn't. So I don't have any children. But having said that, for me, it's just really about how to create meaning and how to create impact on people, whether you're a father or not. There's always so much wonderful opportunity to create difference and meaning in whether that be friends or family or the work that you do, clients. And that's kind of where I really find the fulfillment. The fact that I'm not a father is okay. That's just the path which I accept.
You're listening to 89.7 FM Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue. I am interviewing Meiron Lees, corporate advisor, author, stress expert, and one of the remarkable people that I have come across and want to share with my listeners. Now, we're talking a little bit about, your past, and I did jump away from one thing because I did find it a little bit interesting when you were going through your spiritual sort of searching. You said that you went to seances and you did a whole. Come on, tell us a little bit about the couple of things that you did while you were seeking.
It was a fascinating time in my life. In fact, that year, so I kind of moved away from Orthodox Judaism, and I go, okay, there's got to be the Holy Grail somewhere. So off I go along to church, and here's this Jew sitting in a church and, trying to get the inspiration. And then it didn't kind of do it for me. And then I said, it's got to be somewhere else. And I go into Scientology and go see what that's about. My God, when my parents saw the book next to my bed on Scientology, it did not go down very well, needless to say. then I heard about the seance thing. You go there and you just kind of close your eyes and you tap into this energy, and that was a little bit spooky, but I found it was fascinating. And then going to Native American chanting circles and saying all these words and phraseologies I had no idea about. But I go, am I feeling this yet? No. Okay, so I kind of just then left it after a while, but it was a very interesting journey.
I think it would be. I mean, not a lot of people do that. Most people just go to yoga,
Yeah.
and buy a mat. And that's about, that's their spiritual journey, I think, for a lot of people. You're listening to 89.7 FM, Eastside Radio. This is Natasha and The Dialogue Show, where I interview remarkable people. Meiron Lees is my guest today, corporate advisor, author, and stress expert. You were very successful in South Africa. Apartheid kind of happened and made you decide that you wanted to come live in Australia. Which you did on your own, interestingly enough. Went through the 2-year process, gave up everything that you had in South Africa and moved yourself over here. Now, I know from an immigrant's point of view, it's not easy to assimilate into a new country. You come without a family and all the rest of it. What was your initial reaction when you landed up in Australia, and what was your idea about how you were going to move forward?
Intuitively, I knew I was going to land up here. I had a couple of friends that preceded my immigration that raved about the place. But you don't really know it until you arrive. And, of course, there were all the funny nuances. I arrived from the airport and the guy stamped my passport and see you later, mate. And I thought maybe there's a party for new immigrants. Wasn't sure when I was going to see him later. But it was kind of, it was all those kind of things you kind of get used to.
Yeah.
And of course, some of the South African expressions, well, I'll see you just now. And, that's very connotation in South Africa that can be any time from 5 minutes to 5 hours. But for me, it was really around getting more into the training and development side. I decided to move away from the financial planning side. So I didn't want to go and explore avenues in that area, but more having run a company and wanting to do more the personal development side. That I actually thought about before I left. I used to take off a Friday and go and sit in a nursery. So I only worked 4 days a week, and Friday is to write development programs with the hope that one day I'll be doing them here. And some of those programs are the ones that I'm actually doing today.
You didn't have a client. You didn't have a network. You didn't have anything. How do you start? How do you start building a business from scratch as an immigrant in a new country in something that you actually haven't done before?
It was really tough. It was really, really, really tough. I had actually no idea how tough it was. It was probably a good thing, but maybe I wouldn't have done it. And that way, ignorance is bliss. However, I just think the passion that just really just got me motivated every single day to make those calls and to go and see people and join networking groups. And slowly but surely, my first gig was in the Boulevard Hotel. I remember doing a sales training program. And the only reason I got that because the original guy who they already had locked in couldn't make it and pulled the plug. So I got this call from the sales director to say, are you free on these dates? And I mean, let me go and check my diary, which of course was blank. So of course I'll do that for you. And that's kind of how it started.
Did you always get paid, or did you do some stuff for free?
I always got paid in the main. If it was a little talk or something like that, then I wouldn't. If I thought it would lead to some business further down the track, so I'm happy to kind of give before I receive. So depending on what it was.
Now you've built that. You've been here for how long? How long have you been here for?
Well, in September will be 14 years.
All right, and you've been operating in that industry ever since. You wrote the book, the Destress book. It's Destress. What is the
the byline is building resilience in challenging times.
Right. You wrote that in Australia.
Yes.
Obviously, all that stress had culminated in your immigration, and I kind of get that. But you actually got to use that book yourself at some point because you became very ill.
Yeah. So I started to write the book in about 2007 after having researched stress for many, many years. Even in South Africa, when I mentioned that a little bit earlier about not having an idea to how to manage my own stress, I used to study it quite a lot. In fact, what fascinated me was when I used to go to the Kruger National Park and I watched a buck getting chased by a lion. And I remember one instance, it would fascinate me. The buck got away, but the interesting part of that was not the chase, what happened after the chase. I watched the buck carefully. And I looked around to see if it was safe, and went back to eating grass.
Yeah, it didn't really stress about there was no after effect.
Now that was me. Okay, getting chased by it. I would need trauma therapy. I'd need medication. I wouldn't sleep at night. And there's a buck with a third of my, or whatever, my intelligence. Treats stress is a hell of a lot better. Handles stress a lot better than me. I go, no, hang on a second. What does a buck got that I don't have?
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Stress is such an interesting thing, and it affects so many people today. I think there's a lot of people that need to get that book. Where do they get that book from, by the way?
It's not in the bookshops anymore, but you can get it online. If you just search Destress or my name, it'll come up. You can get it on Kindle and Amazon and those places.
So let's talk about the sickness. Let's talk about what happened to you. You had a pain in your side, and then from there we landed up, walking death's door.
Pretty much. I had a pain in my left side. Thought nothing of it. Left it alone for a few weeks, as us blokes do. She'll be right, mate. And didn't see a doctor. Eventually did. Had no idea what was going on. And cut a long story short, that culminated in me sitting in a gastroenterologist's office after having a CT scan, probably 3 months after the initial event. Saying, I will tell you why you have your pain. I said, please do. He said, well, because your spleen has swelled and pushing up against your ribs, and therefore you got the pain. And of course the question was, well,
why?
Yeah, why is my spleen swelled up? And he looked at me dead in the eye and said, because you've got cancerous tumours in them. And my first reaction was, not being an arrogant South African, but are you sure you haven't mixed up the results of somebody else? I just was in disbelief. Yeah.
Did you go cold? How did your body feel?
I just, my mind was racing and I got goosebumps, and I paused for a while and I looked at him, and the mind's trying to cope with that kind of news, and the first thing that came out of my mouth was, am I going to die? And he paused and he said, probably not. In which case I said, well, I actually laughed. I said, thanks for the comfort, And then the journey continued. I had something called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it spread quite aggressively through my abdomen, and the consequences of which was quite a big you had
tons of stuff taken out.
Yeah, I'm surprised I don't rattle.
So skinny.
Well, I'm surprised I don't rattle when I run, because I don't have a spleen. And
there's a whole lot, but you look very healthy to me. You look healthy. Are you healthy?
I am. I look after myself a lot. I eat well, take my vitamins. I meditate every day. So I as much as possible, trying to live a de-stressed life. So health is just the number one thing for me. So I make sure I exercise. I make sure I eat right. Pretty much juice every day. So that's probably why I'm lucky. I mean, I also think that the mindset helps a lot too.
You recovered from the cancer. It was a very long, slow journey, and you've progressed your business and what you do into, helping people to obviously de-stress, because you're a stress expert.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Does that mean you go into people's offices, or you go in and you actually teach them sort of the mechanics of how to de-stress, or is it like a psychotherapy style thing? What is it?
It takes various forms. One is running workshops on stress and resilience. So if you look at the counterpart to stress, it's resilient, because the more resilient you are, the less stress you'll feel. And that's really what the book focuses on. In fact, I have 7 what I call resilience builders. That if one applies, funnily enough, when I was going through chemotherapy, I said, well, let me go read that book again. And
what did it say, that book I wrote?
Yeah, let's go and apply some of those, which funnily enough made a remarkable difference to me. So coming back to your question, yes, going to organizations, working with teams, even one-on-one with leaders that are having exceptionally stressful jobs, and helping them to manage their own psychology. In fact, the stats are that most absenteeism is caused as a result of stress.
This business is changing quite a lot, and the people within those companies are becoming more aware of how their staff and how they need to look after their mental and their physical well-being. I mean, obviously that gives you a great platform for the future for your business.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you intend to grow that business, or are you comfortable where you're at?
No, not at all. I think there's still a long way to go in Australia with regarding the stress and resilience, and that's borne out by the fact that organisations are recognising it. And 5-7 years ago, you never heard of a wellness company. What was a wellness company?
You didn't.
And now there's so many of them, which is fantastic. Doing a lot of preventative stuff, which I think is good. Part of that, of course, is how you manage stress. My focus as well is not only doing stress coaching, which I do for business owners, so people are just really navigating the journey of the SME journey. It can be lonely, it can be very stressful, so doing that, some mentoring people one-on-one and in teams. But also working with organizations on how to assist them to help their employees to build resilience, as well as when they're ill. What I find that the wellness companies do well is the preventative stuff, and that's good, and I'm all for that. But what I'm finding interesting is that when the employee's at home, that it's a lonely process, and that was borne out by the fact that I never got one call from a doctor ever going through that. So thank goodness for family and friends. But what about the poor employee that's sitting alone at home, is pretty depressed, ill, can't go back to work? There's no one that's actually supporting that person, and that's an area which I'm very, very passionate about.
And that is, I think, a huge has a huge need and requirement. What makes you cry?
I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and I was laughing because I was watching Britain Got Talent, and I was bawling my eyes out.
That wasn't quite the answer I was looking for.
No, I know, but what came to my mind is that this thing makes me cry every single time. And I thought to myself, why do I cry? And I think, when I see pain, or I see not only pain, but somebody is emoting, or somebody's really expressing their vulnerability, it just taps into something for me. And I think that's borne out by the fact that I was in such a vulnerable place myself. So what makes me cry is when I see somebody that is emotionally expressive. Definitely gets me going.
That's actually really beautiful. That's a really beautiful thing to say. So if I'm going to ask you what makes you cry, I'm curious about what you think it is that's inside you. I believe there's one thing inside everyone that makes them get up every morning and keep going. There is one characteristic. What do you think your characteristic is?
You ask very good questions, Natasha. I think
I try.
For me, it's that's an intense sense of purpose. I think about the existential part, of course, especially after my illness. Why am I here? Why didn't I check out? Because there was a point in time I didn't know if I was going to make it. And then when you make it, you go, okay, why am I here? What's the purpose of existence? And I think there's a reason why I wrote this book. There's a reason why I went through my own journey of resilience. And I think I'm born to do this work. I'm born to partner with people and ease their stresses and their burdens and their suffering. That's why I think I'm born. And doing this work is very, very special for me, because it's not just work. It's a real deep passion.
We've come to the end of the interview. I know it goes so fast. I would definitely like that book. So you can send me a copy.
I'll do that.
You have been listening to Natasha on The Dialogue, where we interview remarkable people. I've had Meiron Lees on the show, corporate advisor, author, stress expert, an all-round exciting and fun guy. I will be back next week with some more on The Dialogue. Thank you so much, Meiron.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you.